Hey guys, Sneaky Joyce here, and I want to ask you, what do you think about when you hear FDM? A lot of people will think something like this hot pile of garbage right here, but what I think about is miniatures. Because I've been printing miniatures using FDM for more than 3 years, and in this video I want to show you my process, how I set up my slicer, and how everything is configured, so you can try and do everything yourself too. And I'll also show you the cleanup process, so you can try and get something very complex, extremely complex, which is not normally something you'd want to print on an FDM machine, but which is totally doable on an FDM machine. So if you want to learn this, please feel free to proceed. You have timecodes in the description of the video, so you can jump in at whatever segment is interesting to you. Today I'm going to show you how to convert pretty complex models into something you can print on your FDM printer. I am using Bambu Lab A1 Mini because it's a very cheap printer that I bought specifically for miniatures, but you can apply this knowledge and those tricks to any printer. And here we have two models which we got from Titancraft website. If you want, you can join Titancraft Discord, and they have a lot of discussion for FDM. I also actively participate in FDM printing of miniatures, and earlier I've shared a video which you can see through the tooltip about how I print miniatures and how I get good results. Essentially, you can go into pinned messages here, and in a thread you can download my profiles which work well for me, and currently this one, the last profile for A1 Mini, is the profile I am tuning and is the profile that gives me the best results. So I recommend you to join Titancraft Discord and just grab the profile. If you don't want to participate, you can leave right away, but it's a very nice place and very nice people who help a lot. So now what we're gonna do, I'm gonna go through some settings and explain what they do. If I know what they do, if I don't know what they do, I'll just ignore them. And first of all, we can go through temperature. I am printing with Sunlu PLA Plus. I do this just because it gives me better temperature control, so it prints with higher temperatures and its temperature range is higher than with conventional PLA, so I can dial in temperature for this particular plastic way better than for PLA or PLA Meta even, which can be printed at lower temperatures. The less steps you have, the less control you have, and in my opinion it's worth a little bit increasing the electricity bill and get finer details. So why I print this first layer with higher temperature? Just because I want it to stick better to the bed, and it will give us fewer failures when it comes to supports. We'll come to support in the very end, and maybe you'll see the issues there. Other layers for PLA Plus work well enough at 220. I for myself personally preferred higher temperatures, but I decided to lower them a bit, and in the end of this video we're gonna clean up a model that was printed with these settings. It will be this model of elf girl with chains and sadomasochistic smile. What else do we have here? Something for cooling. You can go through those settings yourself. The more cooling you have for your miniature, the better. If you can, add an external fan that would blow on your miniature somewhere like the cold air. Make sure that you don't blow hot air onto your miniature, so plan your printer location accordingly. Also, I have some wiping overrides here. It would help us a bit with traveling and not knocking down support. There are several options of wiping. I found that spiral works well enough, and despite it creates a small string of filament, for miniatures, it is not as intense of an issue as it may be for larger models, because a miniature you can always cut this extra piece if there is any. If there are none, well, you're just a happy person, but it's something you may want to try if your miniature is failing a lot and it potentially can help you. You can enable this option, and what it does, it cleans the nozzle before it goes up and travels somewhere else. So potentially it can lower the chance chance of knocking something down. Again, with the hop, you can also have this effect. Next, I don't have anything specific here, so let's go with actual model creation logic. Before we start, so you can see I'm using this custom profile, which I built for myself. Most of the time I'm using stock Bumble Lab settings, but I decided to override some of those settings in order to get higher quality results, and I've been really happy with this profile so far. Right now I'm showing you this profile, and I'll go in details about what things do here after I showcase all the settings. So this is for somebody who don't want to listen to me explaining what I'm doing. By the way, multi-material doesn't do anything, and others has some adjustments, but they are not as big. So let's go with quality. I was able to print 0.04 millimeters with my Bumble Lab X1C. It is a larger machine, more sophisticated, but still with A1 Mini I decided to settle down on 0.05, but a lot of people choose 0.07 or 0.8, something like that. They are also pretty happy with those results, and they print faster because fewer layers mean that the model print faster. If you are obsessed with quality like myself, you would want to keep it this way. Next, line width first layer. This is done to improve sticking, because with supports I'm using, first layer is not exactly uniformal, and thicker lines will enable you to have better adhesion to the bed, and this is why I have it. Again, this is optional, this is not important. As well as inner wall. This is something I enabled in order to be able to print landscape with small nozzle, and actually it turned out really well. And top surface as well, I enabled it for higher thickness, despite I'm using 0.2 millimeter nozzle, in order to help with top surfaces of terrain. And if you are not printing terrain, you can keep this at 0.22 or 0.2. It actually is not as important for printing miniatures as we're about to do. The next is actually not changed, but internal solid infill, you can also increase it. If you have a lot of infill, you can set it to 35 and nothing will break. Extruders and nozzles on FDM printers can print with thicker and thinner lines than the hole in the nozzle, just because of the physics of the melted plastic. Next we go with seam position aligned. Seams is not something you necessarily have to carry about when you're printing miniatures, so we can do whatever we want here, but in my case I don't want to do anything here, so this is basically stock on Bumble Lab. So we have arc fitting in order to make some curves curvier and smoother, but with high details which are provided by Titancraft. We don't really need this smoothing, it's already pretty nice and doesn't require smoothing like here, but it's nice to have. Precise wall, this is what we want. Precise wall is something very important in Orca Slicer, unless it was also imported to Bumble Lab, Bamboo Slicer. And precise wall, what it does, it allows you to improve quality, because Prusa Slicer, which Orca Slicer and Bamboo Studio are based on, have an issue which brings your model to a state when it has hull lines like on Benchy. If you ever printed a Benchy, and most likely you did, you most likely saw a hull line on a Benchy, which is a small layer shift where specific geometry changes. This is something you want to have in your prints when you are concerned about quality of your prints. And I am. We don't need ironing because top surfaces are boring, and wall generator Arachne. This is one of the most important parts in this quality section, alongside with layer thickness, because Arachne, what it does, it allows to print smaller size than you set here. So if it sees sharp line, like for instance this corner of his cloak, this will be printed with Arachne, so the corner will be actually sharper than it would be with stock settings. If you're using traditional slicer, this corner of this cloak will not be as sharp and will be a bit rounded. With Arachne it would not be an issue, and it's something I strongly recommend you to have, but if you're printing very tiny details, Arachne has a tendency of removing some details, so you want to pay close attention after your model is sliced. You want to see if everything was sliced properly and nothing is removed. Arachne has a few bugs still, despite it's an old invention, but still, once again, I encourage you to not slack on it, because those miniatures print for about 3 hours, and you don't want to miss on some specific details. So if you can print with Arachne and no details are lost, you must use it.
if some details are lost, you may try to print with classic wall generator and it may be better. You can try to play with those parameters of wall transitioning. I tried to adjust them myself, but it's not something I'm really confident about, so I have to warn you that it's something you have to be on the lookout for. Next, walls printing order. Despite I have inner outer here, normally if you are concerned about quality, you want to have outer inner if you have only 2 walls, or inner outer inner if you have 3 walls or more. This is also needed because of the bug of Prusa Slicer, which also is partially compensated with precise wall, but I discovered that on miniatures it's not as big of an issue, so I just kept it at inner outer. It allows for better stability for overhangs, and as you will see, overhangs can be a bit tricky to work with in our support section, so let's go further. Print and fill first is just something to help the material to grab onto, so a new layer will have just higher chance of success. Next, only 1 wall on top surfaces. This is not necessarily important, but it may be beneficial if you're going to print some terrain. Also, avoid crossing walls it slows down your print significantly, but it gives you a smaller chance of breaking the model because the nozzle drags across a printed part and everything breaks. You can adjust detour length if you want, like something like 1 mm is normally enough, but again, in this profile it's at 0 and it's working good enough. Small area of low compensation is not something I'm really familiar with. I tried using it, but I didn't really have any benefits from it. With bridging, we just want to have thick internal bridges. This is actually a stock parameter of it. And with overhangs, detect overhang walls. This is important because it'll allow to slow down printing. Next, make overhangs printable. This is an option which you may want to use in some certain cases. You must understand that in some cases, like this piece of clock, it has a few areas which don't necessarily need to be very finely printed. Normally those 5 balls will each require a support branch, but if you make overhangs printable, only 2 of them will require a support branch, and the visual quality will not change because those elements are very small. And in fact, on this armor also you can significantly reduce amount of support if you just enable this option. So you can toggle it, try to slice and see if the quality satisfies you. If it doesn't, just remove this option. If the quality satisfies you, you most likely want to use this option because it will make your life a bit easier during the print, because FDM miniatures printing is complicated. This is an option you must remember about. Extra perimeters on overhangs just allows you to print better stable surfaces. Reverse uneven also is something to play with because it will change direction of your printing and generally allow for more stable model. And reverse only internal perimeters, of course, to just add stability inside without affecting external part of the model. Next, let's go with strength. Wall loops 3, because this is enough. As you may remember, we have internal wall 0.35, so 3 walls is actually everything we need. External wall will be thin and will have a lot of details, while internal walls will have fewer details and will be printed faster. Instead of printing 5 walls like I would normally right now, with those terrain adjustments I can print 3 walls, and by this speeding up the print at all. Next, bottom and top layers. Those are 7. For those tiny layers this is plenty, and sparse and fill density is 35% with adaptive cubic. In general, for a model this small you can use whatever. I just like adaptive cubic and I use it for everything. It's very neat support and fill, and you may want to try it if you haven't. The rest is mostly stock because I am mostly fine with those settings. Again, you can use infill combination if you are not really concerned with internal strength of your model. It will drastically reduce the time you need to print the miniature. Next, let's go with speed. Here I have a few adjustments as well. This is also exclusive to Orca Slicer. Small layers. I slowed down the first 2 layers in order to have again better adhesion. For the base everything is printed on. There is no raft I'm using, but I'm using lots of brims and they need to be firm. So this is for the brim layer and for the first layer of support. The rest layers of support, the remaining layers of support, they can be printed with normal speed, and you can see that I did adjust speed here a bit for support and I believe for top surface as well, and maybe I did outer wall, yes. I did outer wall, inner wall. Small perimeters have even this reduction for 60% of total speed of the nozzle, but the top speed of the nozzle is actually controlled by flow rate, or rather by volumetric speed over here, and those parameters are not that crucial if you're printing on Bambu Labs machine, but they may be crucial for you, so you may want to see the profile and see the ratios I'm having and adjust it for your printer and your printer speeds. Slowdown for overhangs is always welcomed because it will allow you to print more areas without supports, and slowdown for curved perimeters is also something you want to have because a lot of curves happen in miniatures, and for instance this perimeter will be very challenging to print on a normal machine, but when you slow it down it will be just fine, and perimeters like this clock, they will be easier to print than this part because it doesn't have as much changes of direction. Next, something for bridges, but from my experience those miniatures are not really using bridges as much as they could, and whenever I tried to get something bridged I didn't get good results, so that's mostly what we have. Acceleration and jerk is something I didn't change, those are stock Bambu Lab parameters. If you want to dig into them, you can do it. And next, the support. I have a very specific preset for supports, and this is the best I managed to get in about 2 years of experiments. Like, I was printing miniatures initially without any experiments at all, just started going at it, and later I started going about supports because supports is your main enemy and your main friend. There are several options for supports, but basically you want to use 3 auto with my profile, and we use organic. There are several options you can have here. This is grid, this is 3 slim. It's everybody, or rather every type of support has its advantages and disadvantages. For instance, main disadvantage of organic support is that it doesn't have support interface, so you cannot modify it, and it will bite you in the ass potentially, but not as much because the rest of the settings were tuned, and you will not have as bad experience as you could have with organic supports. Next, threshold angle. This is one of the main parameters for supports, and one of the things you also need to understand a lot about if you want to have higher quality. The lower parameter you have, less supports you will have in general. To put it simply, you have a horizontal surface, and any deviation from this horizontal surface will be supported until it reaches 30%, and supports will be generated for overhangs whose slope angle is below this threshold, as you can see in the tooltip. Whichever explanation works for you. 30 is the number I decided works good for miniatures, and the only thing you have to look out for when you're slicing is armpits and parts under the dress, so bottom parts of the model. You have to look out for them, and if they are hard to reach, you may want to exclude them from printing. For instance, I know that this Vampire Lord generally prints well enough, and I know that this part can be a trouble, so I'm highlighting it with actually right mouse button here, so it doesn't get any supports, and I would not have to clean it up. So you can see that there are a few lines over here, but this is below the threshold, so it will not be, or rather above the threshold, so it will not be supported anyways. I am only concerned about this part of his back, which might want to be supported. The rest, you can also reduce this part of armpit here, but this is actually not necessary in this particular case because support comes from the side and it's really easy to remove here. With the self-gull, we have a similar situation. If you look at her here, she has some area over here which is very nasty to clean up. You don't want it supported, you want to have rather this part supported, and you don't want to have this part supported like that. And depending on how your miniature is built, you may want to exclude several individual units in the mesh in order to avoid supports when they are not needed. The rest mostly goes well for this model, and I believe you may want to exclude this piece from being supported, but the rest is just absolutely fine. But again, I will show it a bit later, so you understand it better. Now let's go back to the settings, and let's go with first layer density. This is 100%. This is in attempts to improve the first layer's adhesion. Normally it goes with 90%, but in my case I wanted a solid surface, so I set 100%, and it was working very well for me. I really enjoyed how it goes. For first layer expansion, this is the brims I was talking about. I don't use brims on the model itself, but for supports are acting also as brims, and we want supports on build plate only, and we want to remove small overhangs from being supported, because if we don't, the models like this will be supported all across the perimeter because it has a lot of small overhangs. We don't want this, we don't need this, and let's slice those guys. We don't have any rafts, as you can see. Support raft base, we don't adjust it. Top Z distance. This is the distance between the top part of support branch and between the model itself. If you want higher quality, you must reduce this to, for instance, 0.12 millimeters. It will work for quality, but it will be harder to separate the support. If you want easier support, you want this number a bit higher. So 0.2 millimeters is actually the number I am pretty satisfied with. It does have a bit rough lower surface on the arm, for instance, here, or on the bracer, but it works very well. If you want something in the middle with quality and the ease of separation, you go with 1.6 millimeters here. Bottom Z distance is 0, since we don't make supports on the model itself, since we print on build plate only. This is also something you just don't want to use. Next, base pattern spacing. You can use this one for rectilinear support, or rather normal one, but in our case it's not significant, and let's go for something that was changed. Normal support expansion. This is one of the tricks I had up my sleeve. It allows you to have a resin-like thickness of supports while also maintaining tree structure. And support object XY distance, it's how far away the supports will be from the model itself until they have to touch the bottom surface of the model. So they try to avoid the model until they need to touch it. I decided that 0.12 millimeters is good enough because it allows for more precise trees while also allowing supports not to melt with the exterior wall of the model. Don't support bridges. This is something that actually doesn't work here, so you can toggle it on, you can toggle it off, it wouldn't matter. And I keep canceling my slicing, sorry. Tip diameter of support. This is how thick the smallest part of support is, and this is thickness of our wall. So tip of the support will actually be as thick as you can print the walls with this profile. And tree support branch distance. This one parameter, it actually does something. It adjusts the distance between how the branches start growing from the bottom of the plate, and you can reduce it if you want higher density support, or you can increase it if you want to have higher density support. And branch density is also something to keep a lookout on, because with 20% you get very good results, but in some cases you may want to have higher density of support in order to keep in there more complex structures. Like if you have a lot of details in the bottom part of the model, you may want to increase branch density, but the higher the density, the harder it is to clean up. But in my opinion, the 20% I have here just do wonders. Tree support branch diameter. This is the target value. This is the diameter of a tree branch it will try to achieve, because you can have a trunk, you can have a branch, and you must have some idea between the difference of those two. Branch diameter angle is 3 degrees, because I want them to be as vertical as possible. This is the target value, but it can be deviated from. Tree support branch angle 50 degrees. If you want to have support like this, which can deviate and can squish underneath your model and support it from a weird angle, this is what you want to adjust. And preferred branch angle, again, I don't want them to be too sparse, I don't want them to be too populated. I want them at 15 degrees, and this is what we get. But those are supports in stock orientation. Also, we have branch diameter with double walls. For the bottom part of this tree, you will have higher thickness of support in order to have higher stability of the support. But thinner branches of the trees on top will have one wall only, and this is done in order to just ease the separation a bit. But you can see that this is not exactly one wall, this is 1.5 wall. So this is one of the reasons I'm also using organic support, because it allows for this weird behavior here. I'm not exactly sure why it's caused, but this is something worth knowing about again. And then let's go with others. Setting. We don't have skirt, we don't have skirt speed, we don't have brim. We have slicing print sequence by object. You may want to ask why I'm doing this. It's because it would be easier to cancel print if something goes wrong and start anew, and the printer will be focused only on one model while it's printing, and you will lose actually less material and less time if you only have one model failed in the middle. Like here, one model would be ready and another one would fail somewhere here, and you will still have one model properly ready for you. This is one of the reasons. And the second reason, which I am using this for, it is in order to allow better quality for the models, because once again, the Prusa slicer has a bug where in geometry feature changes, there are hull lines like what you can see on Benchy. And if you print two models simultaneously, you will have more lines of this type. So you want to ideally let printer focus on one model and have less artifacts caused by the geometry of this model. So this is very important part. You want to have by object enabled whenever you can, and the rest of the settings is basically unchanged. Next thing I want to talk to you about, which is also very important, it's science about compromises. When you're slicing your models, you need to decide how your model will be oriented. But you also need to decide on the placement of the model on your build plate, because placing a model, if it's the only model like this, is a bad idea. You know why? Because it's surrounded by a warm build plate, and it essentially will increase temperature of the air that's being blown on the model, reducing the cooling. You don't want that. You want your model to be situated somewhere on the edge, ideally in the corner, and it will improve your model quality on larger printers like Bumbleup A1, because people have been reporting, especially Fat Dragon games, that on A1 he's getting lower quality models just because he's printing in the middle and he's not getting enough of cold air. Once again, you can use an external fan in order to improve quality of the models while they're being printed. But then again, orientation of the model is also something to be wary about. And what I like to do, I like to print miniatures without bases. You can see that this one is very complicated when it comes to supports. And what I like to do, I like to rotate those models so their feet are oriented on the same line, something like that. And then I tilt them backwards, something like that. And the idea here is to get several points of contact with the base. So you may want to do this a bit more like that. And we'll have several points of contact with the base, which are this part, and then on the base of the clock, we have this corner touching the base. So it will improve quality of the model a bit in those areas. And it will significantly boost the facial features, like you can see here. They don't require any supports. Those fingers he has will require supports and they will print poorly, but the face and the armor will be printed in the best possible quality, as well as the sword also will not struggle from this orientation because of the layer lines. It will be oriented a bit diagonally, and it will in turn increase its strength a little bit. Next, for the elf lady, let's move her to the middle for now while we're positioning her. But then again, I want to orient her feet something like that, I believe, and I want to tilt her somehow. But we need to think about how we want to have her tilted, because she has only a few small points of contact with surface, and you will not be able to utilize them fully as well as you have in this guy. You can also, by the way, in this guy, go and increase overhangs highlight and make it so the feet are printed with supports. So they will not fail, because you can have the back part of the foot be dislodged if you don't support the middle part, and the model can fail. This is also something to be on a lookout for. This clock, let's support it because it doesn't touch the bottom, and this part we can support it like that. Those parts will be supported anyways, but you can choose if you want to support them specifically. Something like that will do the job just fine and will be pretty easy to clean up. This part actually will not be a trouble, but again, this part can be, so you may want to exclude it as well from being supported, because we don't need it. Let's go back to the elf lady here, and let's see, we have those spikes which we want to preserve. So ideally they are printed in a way that will allow them all to be supported at the same time. Those are very close to being horizontal, so what we want to do, we want to tilt this lady not to the back but to the right a bit, like that. We have her on the right, and this would be a better orientation because supports would be able to come from the bottom over here, and they will be able to support the spikes. Next, the chains. The chains with this profile are printed just fine, and I don't really think they need a lot of adjustments. Once again, I have to mention that you have to exclude from the supported regions the armpits, the parts of the model which have some really high angle walls coming to each other. So you want to exclude this region from being supported, and by doing this you ensure that it's easier for you to clean this model up. Next, this piece of blade will be supported just fine, and let's go and slice those models once again. I have this lady printed in this specific orientation, and I'll show you how she's being cleaned up and what tools I'm using for it. And yeah, let's see how it goes for both of them, and I'll draw your attention to some regions that can cause troubles for you. And now you can see that both models are sliced and they are being supported. You can see the supports on the elf lady coming from the side and also coming from the middle between her legs. They support the spikes a bit better than they would be doing if there were no tilting for her. For this guy, you can see that those feet are supported very well, and it's kind of hard for me to tilt camera right now because for some reason they decided to center the rotation around the middle of the build plate. But you can see that the sword is not exactly perpendicular to the sword's main axis. You can see that infill is pretty thick for the internal walls, and external walls are thinner and allows for higher quality details. And with the cape you can see that one of the supports is going up here, but it's for supporting the armpit, the one I was mentioning earlier. I have this model printed, and it's printed pretty well. Then we go further to the bottom, and we can see that this part of this cloak can be an issue. It will be very hard to clean up. So if we are going to print this, we may want to double check if we excluded all the necessary regions here, but this support is absolutely not needed here because this is not part of the miniature you will be seeing ever, so you just can exclude it from here. Then we go to the base of the cloak here and base of the feet. You can see how feet are supported. They are basically printed inside a cup formed from the support walls and support branches. Then you can see that the cloak is printed in the mid-air, the first layer of the cloak, and this will be a bit of an issue potentially, but in the most cases it's something that you can process physically and it will be just fine. And the cloak over here is being printed from the first layer, and it has some stability, and the layers add up and it forms a nice curve over here to then form into a decent vampire lord. The only issue I had with this miniature is that Sword's Hilt fell off because I was using too low temperature. I was printing at 215 instead of 220. On 220 I didn't have any issues with it. Next, let's go with this girl and see how she goes. The feet will be very hard to print, and you may face a little bit of failure over here. This is actually something you may want to support, so let me get rid of the vamp guy so we can do it faster. For those heels, you may want to add supports manually, like that. This is also something I did for this miniature, and it did help her to maintain her heels. So let's slice it again, and here we go. Let's see. Now you can see that the heels are also formed inside the little cup. You may want to actually reduce area of the miniature which you are supporting, so it has, instead of this thick area of support, you may want it to have a small line of support like that, and this part actually should be supported. So we're forming a line which will help stabilizing the heel. It will not necessarily work from the first time, but you may want to tilt her a bit more, and it will help you with the heels if you will be having the trouble. So something like this should work pretty good. But I was printing in such orientation, so this is something we'll be proceeding with. So once again, we go with the heels. This time I believe this one may have trouble when you're cleaning it up, but the second one should be fine because it's not surrounded by the supports, and supports are pretty thin on the first layer, so it should not be an issue. Then we have a few spikes. Let me rotate the camera so you can see them better, and those spikes should have support when they have specific angles, which should be hard to print. So you can see that the first spike over here, it's looking upwards and it doesn't have significant issues, but the spike over here, it's printed almost horizontally and it has potential issues, so it's being supported. And those spikes are being supported for you automatically. Once again, something to look for is when supports are hugging fragile elements. This is not something that I can unfortunately evade, and this may happen, so you must retain your sliced file until you finished cleaning the model. Unfortunately, I didn't retain my file for current model, so I'll be cleaning blindfolded, but it's something I've done a few times, so I don't think it will be an issue. And look at the chain. The chain over here, it's also being printed in thin air, and it has pretty significant support over here. The supports are very stable, they have thick walls still, and they are not very intrusive. So earlier I was printing with higher threshold angle and way more elements of the chain were supported, and it was a real pain in the ass to clean up. Luckily now I figured out a way with lower threshold angle and parameters for trees, and this model will be printed just fine with those settings. And you can see that the blade also is being supported and printed in thin air, and the finished model looks something like this. And here you can see this parameter I've been talking about with distance, top Z distance, 0.2 millimeters. This is 0.2 millimeter, and this is how you have your model separated easier. Once again, if you want higher quality but harder separation, you go with 0.12. If you want something in between, you have 0.16. And if you want the simplest support removal experience in your life, you go with 30, and then everything will be very saggy. I warned you. And let's look at the hair once again, because it's something I've excluded from support regions. You can see still that some part of the hair is being supported here, closer to the body, but it's not really the bad part to dislodge, so it will be very hard to disconnect the supports if they would be ending in the interconnection between the hair and the body itself. But since we removed supports from this interconnection, it will be actually very easy to remove the supports, and the ears of this elf lady will also be printed just fine in this orientation. Here you can see this piece of arachne issues I've been talking about in the beginning of the video. This is something you may want to try without arachne maybe. It will not necessarily print better with regular slicer mode, but you may want to try it nevertheless, or you can try to play with arachne settings and see if you can get it to even better state. And as you can see with classic wall generator, it will print the ear without any interruptions in them, and it may be something that you want to use instead of arachne in specific cases where you are really concerned about the details. In my case, I printed this elf lady with arachne and she ended up just fine, but again, it's something you must be wary of. This is a setting to remember. And now let's go to cleaning process and the tools you need for the cleaning. Before we proceed with cleanup, let's see the tools I have and I use in my cleanups. Something to protect your eyes is very important, as well as side cutters, also some CA glue, long and bent pliers, as well as potentially a blowtorch lighter, and soldering iron for smoothing, and a nail polishing machine as well as manicure scissors are also welcome. Supports in my current profile are a bit too hard for manicure scissors, so most of the time I'll be using side cutters. You can see that at this point we have a little bit of the mini cleaned up, and it has a hanging chain which is not supported by anything. It's already not a bad start. Oh, it flew away. This is exactly why you want to wear eye protection. Next we have to be really careful over here, and for long branches your main idea is to separate the middle part from the base and from the model itself. This is essential in order to avoid parts of the model being pulled away by you proceeding to clean up the model. Snapping a wrong piece of plastic in the wrong place if it's connected to something else can cause significant damage. Here again we have to be very careful because this part can snap very easily. Next we're gonna work a bit on her hair in order to get access to the internal part of the model. And after carefully separating this part of support, we can see that the bottom part of the hair doesn't have significant scars, and the hair also holds up in air. And this cut I'm doing right now, I don't exactly see what I'm doing. It's not a correct approach, but I don't have other option. If you have some pieces that are barely holding, try to remove them because they will be distracting you from cleaning up the model. Next I'm going to try clean up this piece of hand, and I'm doing this by separating branches of the tree where it's possible, and where it's possible I will just be slightly pulling and the support will go away by itself. Just like this, and it's all good. Once again, here is a tricky moment over here. It's very hard to clean up this miniature while also trying to film the process and showcase the actions I take. Removing those tiny pieces because they obviously are parts of the supports, and carefully removing support from the front part to not damage the spikes because spikes are really fragile. Maybe it's better to rotate it and it would be easier to grab. And note that right now I'm trying to wrap the support around the side cutters. I'm not trying to cut, I'm trying to wrap it down in order to separate parts of the support from the fragile part of the mini. When you wrapped down the significant part of the support to remove it from the fragile part, in this case her fist, you can get out the big guns and just cut it away. But we still have something hanging on there. Let's try to disconnect it. Once again, it may be hard to film, and I cannot get a perfect angle for this, but there is a small piece of plastic hanging near her fist, and it's still possible to remove it. You can try to cut it away and there will not be a big deal, but you can try to also work through it with a nail polish machine. This is not really important because we'll be doing another round of cleaning up, but what's important now is that the texture in the bottom of the hand kinda matches the texture in the upper part. And as I am still not confident about my ability to clean up legs at this moment, let's go to her left arm and start with this external part. It's very thin and it will get separated without any issues. I didn't cut anything here, I just moved it away, and it's holding just fine. And once again, we have to be extra careful here, because the chains are very fragile, and you have to separate the supports really carefully. And by the way, when you're done with a branch, you can just rip it away from the base, like that. A lot of times you can do this without any effort. Next, let's start cleaning up her face, because we are slowly approaching the final of this process. In such places you need to squish and pull. Since in the previous attempts I didn't have any supports on the face, I am a bit confused right now about how to proceed with that. Yeah, so if I would have excluded her mouth from the support, she would have ended up way better than she is right now, but we still can bring her to a proper state later. But at the current stage of the cleanup, we have something like that. Yes, it can be fixed, and yes, we'll be doing it later. And here we have another big piece, and it flies who the hell knows where. It's just a good thing I'm wearing eye protection. And right here is a tricky part where you need to understand where is the chain on the front of the model and where is the support. So ideally you remove the support without damaging the chain. And this is why you want to have the reference on your hand after you had it sliced. Have to be real careful when pulling because the spikes are really fragile. And this piece of support is really stubborn and I have to again cut really carefully. In fact, chains are a specific problem of FDM printing. I recently was printing a piece of decoration for front of the ship, and I spent about 1.5 hours for cleaning it up, but this was before I tuned this profile to the state it is at right now. At this point, I think that we can go ahead and proceed with cleanup of her legs. Once again, have to be really careful to not damage the spikes. And over here, we can just pick it up and pull without any cutting once again. The support kinda falls off all by itself. You don't even have to be smart about it, you just need to pull away and that's it. Now we can easily separate the leg from the support itself, and it's also very easy to pull off. And now, when one of the legs was cleaned up, I have to be extra careful because in the past I was holding the model by the supports, and now I will not be able to do this without damaging the spikes. So at some point during the complex figurines cleanup, you have to get really creative about how you hold the model. And here the side cutters are too large to allow me to cut the piece, so manicure scissors it is. And then side cutters again, but you see that I didn't really need those. Oh, next, before I forgot, I need to clean this part aside from her boobs, and I actually can grab her by the hair while we're at it. And this allows us to proceed with finalizing cleanup of her hand, and again, we just need to pull the support slightly, and it goes away by itself. And yeah, this piece over here is kinda rough again, and I have to point out again that where possible you must try to avoid support on the face. So yeah, the armpit I mentioned are hard to clean, and the face. Just like that, and let's see how it looks. I think it doesn't look all too bad, but I can see that I kinda bent a piece of a spike over here, and we can just easily fix it with pliers. Again, this piece might be tricky because there are also some spikes, but I think that they may not be as crucial for the model if you're printing it in FDM. And another stubborn piece of plastic that we have to cut away, and now I almost have nothing else to hold this model with. Here we need to do a little twist, and here we have a very complex situation. I'm not really sure which piece I should start with, but let's always start with exterior parts or parts that stick out. And once again, we go for the middle first. Yeah, another one flew away, and I don't know where it went. Luckily, my eyes are still safe. Alright, let's inspect the model, that everything is still in place, the ears, the eyes, yeah, all good. Alright, we don't need this piece anymore, we can get rid of it, it only distracts us. Have to avoid holding her by her legs, once again, not to damage the spikes even more, or alternatively we can just rotate it like this and try to hold the existing supports. Since this part doesn't hold anything in place anymore, we can just be very bold about getting rid of it. Carefully checking over here, and yeah, it doesn't hold anything in place, so we can just go and recycle it later. And let's see if this stick over here holds anything. Oh yeah. And we have two segments of supports, it's one of her legs and this chain. For now we can just ignore the scars from the supports, we'll get rid of them in the very end. At this point we can use the beam from the support to hold the model in place and to not fuck up the tiny details of the model, but you can see that I already slightly did that. There is a chance I'll be able to straighten them up in the very end, but if I won't, ah well. And once again, in this part, I try to separate the branches from the tree in order to make the future cleanup process safer. You have to always remember that by pulling one of the branches you can destroy the whole miniature. And here you can see once again that I'm trying to separate a small branch like that, and then I'm trying to wiggle it in order to carefully remove it. This one holds not too firm, so we can just separate it like that. And the next piece we can just slightly pull and it gets away like that. Now gotta get rid of this fat chunk over here. It's very dense and holy fuck, it flew away. And we're going really close to finishing this cleanup. And I'm still kinda confused about what would be the better approach for separating those branches from each other, but they are not really connected to the fragile chain, so I can be more brave about it. And yeah, the chain isn't really connected to those support branches, and we can clean the remaining supports from the chain just by squishing in between the chain and the support piece. By squishing instead of cutting, you can get rid of some support pieces which may be otherwise more complicated to clean. And yeah, the chain is in place, and we can proceed to clean up the remaining support. And below the head there is not too much to worry about. The hand and the leg will be the most complicated parts remaining. Let's once inspect the model, and it looks pretty dandy. And let's hold it by the brim once again. Just continuing the routine cleanup and try not to bend the spikes on her legs. The supports are not really fused with the model, well, maybe slightly, but you can still pull them away without much effort, and they leave behind only slight scars, while not giving you much troubles. You can see that support kinda hugs her back, and it's kinda unpleasant, but is not something we cannot overcome once again. And I have to note that at this point it's very inconvenient for me to clean while filming at the same time. Ideally I would like to have cleaned this in the very beginning, but I didn't notice it because I had a lot of supports on the sides of the model. But once again I have to state that ideally you would exclude the face from being supported, and in the previous attempts of printing this elf gull I didn't have her face supported, and it turned out way better in all cases. And as we can see, we didn't damage all too much, and the support on the leg may seem brutal, but it will still be kinda easy to separate and then heat treat those so the scars go away. And I've reached the chain that's tied around her back. Need to be careful pulling here, and we're getting a straight line here. Once again, in such places it's very important to understand how the model was sliced and where the supports go to. Alright, I've been postponing this for far too long. Let's try to clean up her hand finally. And I'll be doing it by trying to cut into the support instead of cutting the support itself. It may make it easier for me to later wrap the support around the side cutters and get rid of them safely. And here I may not be able to show it properly because the chain is the last thing I want to break right now. This piece is extremely complicated, and this is one of the reasons I advise to not support armpits and other similar regions. And we also have a fragile chain nearby, so it's very hard to clean up in general. And it's twice as hard to do when you're also trying to film it and don't see the model. And here I'm just trying to chip away small pieces, starting from her fist once again. And once again, after we get far side of her hand free from the support, we can start doing it more aggressively. And like that, a very big chunk of support just gets dislodged, as almost if it wasn't bound to the model. And in addition, this piece of support also drags an armpit support with it. And once again, I missed a piece of support over here. I'll try to put it like that, but I'm not sure which would be the best way to do it. Well, it will do. It will do. Now we can hold her by the chain because we don't have any more convenient spots to hold, and this piece of support is already fragile enough, so we can just pull it like that. Fine and dandy. Now again, the bottom part of the arm, you just go ahead and squish it without actually trying to cut it. Pull it from the other side and wrap around side cutters a bit. And over here too, we just try to pull it and rotate side cutters a bit. And you can see this part is not ideal once again, but this is FDM, there's nothing you can do about it at this stage of cleanup. Well, I don't think we'll be able to clean this hand up better than we did already, at least not by using side cutters. It makes sense to finish cleaning up the armpits and then the legs. A bit of the support from the belt area, a piece from the back, but there is also some support that got me confused with the chain. But yeah, I guess it's more the chain than the supports, and I'm not going to proceed with this part of the model. Well, maybe I can pull this little piece over here. Now we've done the top part of the miniature, and I am more or less satisfied with the result. More or less because during the paint job most of the flaws will go away, and even during the final parts of this cleanup we'll get rid of most of them. You can see that the miniature is very strong by itself, and I can just hold this piece of the chain and it will not get broken off. Obviously the chain that's connected from two sides will hold way better than the one that's connected only from one side. And we'll finish this by cleaning up her legs. It will leave a bit of scars on them, but it's not really a big deal. I want to pull the supports from between her legs. And so far it's looking pretty good. Inspecting the model, and I still see a few small pieces I would like to get removed. Despite the fact that supports are slightly fused with the model, they can be removed very easily if you just twist a little bit. And you have to keep in mind that the model was laying on this layer of supports here. This model I chose because it's very textured, and the texture itself gets fused with the supports a bit more than normally you would like to have it to. And with my profile, if you're printing simpler models, the support removal will not be as tedious as you can see it for me right here. And once again, we're trying to inspect her legs, that I didn't break her spikes over here, well, as much as it's possible for an FDM print that's being cleaned up right now. And this leg will be kinda tricky to clean up, and to do it, we'll have to finalize work with our base. We'll have to get it separated from the base, which frankly I don't really want to do, because this base beam was really convenient to hold for. Well, maybe I can try to form it into something more convenient. If I cut it a bit differently, let's see. And by forming this shape, I can try to pull the bottom part of the support once again, and it should go away really easily. The middle part can also be pulled very simply, and the spikes seem to be intact. And this part of the model she was laying up on should also be cleaned up, and the piece of support that holds her feet is kinda easy to get separated from. You just have to cut in between the model itself and the support once again, and when you hold the grip you may try to twist, and you can see that the heel is actually intact, and we can go ahead and proceed with the second foot. Once again squeezing the support a bit to deform it. So here's the model of this elf gull with some spikes. I spent half an hour to get her cleaned up. Next, let me introduce you to my best print and cleanup work of this model. This also is FDM and printed on the same printer with the same profile and the same settings, but this time I didn't forget to exclude her face from the supported regions. This is absolutely the same model and the same size. So if you are not as distracted as I am with explaining how you should slice it, you can get better results than what I just did. And once again, having this model next to me, I can spot a few supports I managed to miss, but again, this is not really a big deal. Yeah, and a small piece of support over here. And also doing some minor cleanup over here. Final inspection showed that mostly this model is up to speed with its expected quality. And now, when I'm mostly satisfied with how this model goes, I can use the nail polish machine in order to get rid of the smaller supports that I was unable to get rid of by using the side cutters. A lot of times this machine can just stress the support enough so it gets separated. Also, by probing the model with polish machine, I also discovered a piece of support which I may need to remove in order to clean up in between her legs. Once again, I'm going to squish it instead of cutting. Having the model deformed allows you to pull the rest of the supports that are interconnected. And let's try once again. Sometimes it can also melt the material a bit and by this allow you to pull it away. Unfortunately, I'm not really used to this specific bit and I have to pull it away like that, potentially damaging the spikes, so don't do this yourself. So now I feel that I'm done with this nail polishing machine. Now my favorite blowtorch technique, and you have to be really fucking careful with it, because thermoplastic is really easy to melt. So why do we need it? Because a blowtorch allows you to get rid of the support scars and clean them away even further. You can imagine that since the support isn't really fused with the model, it cannot be cooled by it. And you can see that PLA Plus plastic I'm using is really easy to hit, especially in those thin areas like this chain. And even 2 clicks of this blowtorch make the chain very soft. And radiation heat is enough actually to deform the spikes on her chest, and we have to do something about it before we proceed. Whenever it's possible, if you notice something was deformed, try to straighten it up before you proceed with cleanup. Also, take a notice on how her face looks way better than it was looking before, after just slightly torching it. Yes, in the original model she had her mouth open, but once again, don't support mouth. Gonna be very careful here. Extremely fucking careful. Alright, I'm satisfied with those results. Obviously we have to clean up her back a little bit, and look at this. And just like that, step by step, the model finally gets its final look. It doesn't look as worn as it used to, and it's not really mandatory to do a blowtorch treatment, but it allows you to get rid of small support elements. And in general, after heat treatment, the model looks better and allows you to paint it easier. And I also mentioned that we can use soldering iron for those purposes, and without actually touching the model, you use radiation from the soldering iron to smooth the surface of the model. So let's see how it works. I'm turning it on and it goes to 350 degrees Celsius. When it finishes heating, we can use it for zonal heating in order to avoid heating important parts, like spikes in our case. And now we're just trying to hold the tip of the soldering iron near the model, and if possible, we try to avoid touching the model. Just the radiation from the tip of the soldering iron is enough to actually treat those areas of the model without actually touching them. Of course, if the speed is not enough for us, you can just bump up the temperature so it works even better. And soldering iron allows me in this case to treat the surface, which otherwise I wouldn't be able to. Most of the time I'm not touching the model, I'm trying to just stay close to it. Well, I can touch it a bit if I want to, but in general, you can see especially this part I'm treating without actually touching the chain, and the scar just goes away. So this is what we get in the end, this little model with spikes not deformed. The chainmail is distinguishable, and everything looks really nice in my opinion, and depending on what model you have and what features it has, you can use either soldering iron or the blowtorch in order to get rid of the scars and make the model more appealing before painting it. And then comes the part where I am gluing the model to a base in order to further potentially paint it or showcase it or do whatever with it. This is what we actually needed CA glue for, and it glues in place really fast. You have to hold it in place for like about maybe 20 seconds without moving it, and the glue cures.
So here it is. The miniature looks really nice. It can be painted and played with later on. I hope this video was really helpful to you guys. If you liked what I explained to you here, please feel free to maybe go donate me if you want, because this video doesn't get monetized and I spent a lot of time and effort to get all this information together for you. And maybe ask your questions or join Titancraft Discord and participate there. Titancraft is a really nice place because they don't charge you for export, they charge you only for buying of assets you're using in your miniature, so you can buy a set of assets and use them as many times as you wish. So I'm not sponsored by Titancraft, but this is something I really adore in their monetization strategy, and I really cannot emphasize how grateful I am that they exist and they allow this. So once again, my name is Sticky Joe, and if you like this video, please perform YouTube routine. Have a nice day.